Hello, Knoxville. Welcome to a City Council special called workshop. I'll do the call to order now, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll take a roll call. So that Pledge of Allegiance will be led by Councilman Roberto. Please stand as you're able.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Johnson, please call the roll.
Councilwoman Fugit.
Here.
Councilwoman Helsley. Councilwoman McKenzie. Councilwoman Parker.
Here.
Councilman Roberto.
Here.
Councilwoman Singh. Vice Mayor Smith.
Here.
And Councilman Thomas. 6 members present.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Welcome everyone who is attending in person, but also watching from home. We're here today at the request of council to review voting options for the City of Knoxville elections. We have had long-standing processes for voting in the city, and due to a recent state law change, we have a brief window, to consider any alternatives. And so we will review both the existing approach to voting. We will look at the state law that was recently passed. We will discuss a process for any changes and what impact that would have to City of Knoxville elections. And we will hear about any proposals from council members and have a general discussion. This is a non-voting meeting, but we will discuss these items at length. We have collected questions from council members and shared those with some of the presenters tonight. We've also asked for input from MTAS. A representative from MTAS was not available to join us tonight, but I am assured that they will be available on Tuesday as we hear some of the proposals as part of our normally scheduled council meeting. However, MTAS has contributed a lot of research and input and provided those to members of the presenters today, particularly Mr. Frost. So MTAS will be present with us even if not in person. And one more item for council members. I would suggest that council members ask questions in the sequence of the agenda. This is pretty dense agenda, so don't save them all for the end. And some of the topics are unique and different. So feel free to weigh in with questions, and we will have discussion at the end as well for any questions that were not answered as part of the regular agenda. So to start, I have asked Mr. Frost to join us in a little bit of a different seat tonight to review our existing manner of holding elections related to our existing city charter. So Mr. Frost, I'm not sure if there were specific questions presented by council to you for this section, but if you would please give us an overview of our existing elections and how they function.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Smith. Let's talk about the district-specific seats first. We presently have 6 districts. Districts 1 through 4 and District 6 are elected at one time. And then 2 years later, District 5, currently represented by Councilmember Thomas, and the 3 at-large seats are elected. So for the district races, right now what's on the books, but I'll get to why that is now not allowed, everybody runs within the district they want to represent for the primary election, and then for the general, also known as a regular election, those 6 district seats run on a citywide basis. For the 3 at-large seats, for the district seats, you must live in the district you wish to represent. For the at-large seats, the residency requirement is you're a resident of the city of Knoxville. It can be anywhere in the city of Knoxville for 1 year minimum. And the people who run for at-large seats A, B, and C, they run on a citywide basis in the primary, and they run on a citywide basis in the general election. What the state law has done, and it's contrary to the city charter, however, if people remember their civics classes in the pecking order, the state comes above the city. So we don't even need to change our charter to go with what the state has changed the law to mandate, and that is for the city district races, you only have a district primary, and then the top two vote getters have a runoff, but only only voters in that particular district get to vote. That's what the state has mandated us to do, the city of Knoxville. We don't even need to change our charter because we'll do what the state law says. We'll comply. So that, a little bit brings us to the discussion here tonight about items further on down the agenda.
Thank you for that. Before we move a little bit more detail into the most recent state law that was passed, are there any questions for Mr. Frost? Councilwoman Fugit.
How long have we voted this way as a city, the way you just described? Like since the 50s? I mean, I'm just,
It was 1969 was the first election.
1969. And prior to that, if memory serves, everybody ran citywide prior to that. There were no districts.
Correct.
Thank you.
All seats were at large.
All right, thank you. Yeah. And in 1969, we created districts.
It was 68 technically,
68.
but the first election was 69.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Parker.
Well, just to piggyback off of that question, I'll ask that in a section. Actually, I want to back up a little bit just to get it on the record because this workshop was introduced as a workshop called by council. But I would object to that because we have a process in place to set workshops. And I've asked for a charter review process workshop, which would include this section of our charter for the last 2 years and haven't been able to get a workshop. And that is a process that the full city council votes on. So I'm not holding either of our vice mayors accountable, but we as a body should be held accountable to when we are scheduling this workshop. And we've had an opportunity over the last 2 years, but have not taken it. And we've had an opportunity over the last year since the state law has passed. We've had an opportunity over the last 6 months since the law department has announced that they're not pursuing a legal case. And I'm just a little frustrated that we've chosen at this late hour to hold the workshop. So I just wanted to clarify that I don't feel like this is a workshop that the council has requested unless the brief conversation at the last council meeting represents a way for us to override our other processes for scheduling workshops. I also don't know what the count was that day on how many people said we needed a workshop on this topic. So I take issue with that description. I feel like we should have done a workshop much earlier. The next thing I wanted to comment on was what Mr. Frost commented on, which was that whether we do a charter amendment this year or not, we will have to change our elections. We will not be able to move forward with our same system that we have in place. And when I spoke with the law department earlier this year about bringing an ordinance to change our charter, I was told that an ordinance was not needed because the state law would take effect and we would not have to rush the process. And so I did not want to rush the process after having that conversation, but I regret that we are just now beginning the conversation. And so I would want us to keep in mind what we were just shared, which is that not including the 5th district issue, but just pertaining to what we are having to respond to in terms of the state law, we are not required to change the charter this year in order for us to get a new election process in place for next year. Have I said that in a way that is correct?
I think that's a fair representation. The city and the election commission will abide by state law.
Thank you.
Councilmember Roberto.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Director Swanson, I wanted you to address the rushed process. Did you have occasion to review and suggest changes or edits to the 5th District Amendment proposal?
I did, yes.
Did you have occasion to review and suggest changes or edits to the Regional at-Large Amendment proposal?
I did.
And Mr. Frost, did MTAS and yourself have conversations regarding the 5th District Amendment proposal?
Yes,
Did they have a chance to review that proposal and suggest edits?
I believe they did.
And did you have occasion, as well as MTAS, to have discussions about the at-large amendment process?
I wish I had more time, but I was able to.
All right. And did they make suggestions and edits?
They did.
And do those edits and suggestions find themselves in what is in front of council?
They did. I think they did a great job.
Okay. So I would disagree with the characterization that this is a rushed process.
Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you. I'd like to respond. Because when I brought charter amendments before this body 2 years ago, in June of 2022, I was told at that time that there wasn't enough time for us to discuss those issues as a body and for us to bring those to the public for a discussion before they would go on the ballot. So I'm following what my colleagues have expressed in the past in terms of a timeline. And if introducing charter amendments in June of a year is too short of a process, I imagine that introducing it at the end of July is also a rushed process. And those items may have been introduced to MTAS and the law department, but especially the regional representatives, this is the first any of us have had to consider this. This is the first that the public is hearing about this idea of regional representatives, and I believe council and the public needs more time when major amendments like that are brought before us.
Any other questions on this item? Councilwoman Fugit.
Thank you. I don't know if this is the law director or Mr. Frost, but I know that when the state law changed, the city of Knoxville was impacted, and are there other municipalities that vote somewhat like we did?
You know? I believe that there are. I believe that there were, I think there was a handful of other municipalities who were similarly impacted because it was a statute of general application.
And is the proposal that MTAS has reviewed, is this the way other municipalities vote so that they are not impacted by the state law?
Yes.
Okay. So this way of voting, while it is different, is used elsewhere in the state of Tennessee?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Helsley, just to keep us focused on the outline of the agenda, if there are any questions or concerns around how we currently vote or the structure of our current processes.
I was just going to piggyback on how many municipalities in Tennessee vote the way of our proposal? Do you know? No,
Councilmember Roberto might.
We might-
16.
16. Do it
16.
like what we're proposing to do.
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe we'll revisit that.
And just for the record, we did vote on doing this at the last meeting, and the vote was 8-1, in case anybody wasn't watching and wanted to know.
Councilmember Thomas.
Yes, just a question, I suppose, for the law department, or if we were to pass one of these charter recommendations, when would it be on the ballot for the voters?
November 5th? Is that right, Mr. Davis?
November 5th, so the public would have until November 5th to review our actions and then decide whether or not that they wanted to accept them. Is that fair to say? I mean, that's stating the obvious, is it not? So, I'm addressing the issue about whether or not there's been enough discussion and whether or not the public would have time to review our actions, but the final word would be in November for the public to give us an okay or a not okay. So there would be until November for the public to review whatever action that we took.
Councilwoman Parker.
For those 16 other municipalities, I think it's important to understand more about them before we compare them to Knoxville. What is the population size of these cities? Do they have a similar government structure than we do? Are we talking about an alderman structure of government? Are we talking about a councilmanic structure of government? These are, important conversations to have as we're considering changing our election system. And for me, I feel, a bit taken back and a bit nervous with this process because I see before me an electoral system being presented that is a fully at-large system, essentially, in a city where I'm the only person of any color to ever win an at-large seat. And when we see people of color come onto the city council, it is when we form districts. I can't even get past that part of the conversation. What is being proposed is going to a system that no other Black person has been able to get elected within. I mean, people are telling me it's been 114 years we've been working for this, or whatever it's been. And now we want to move our entire system to that and ignore the fact that we did not have a person of color on this council until we formed districts. I'm struggling with that, y'all.
Thank you. Just to keep us going, Councilmember Roberto, any questions or discussion around our existing elections?
Yes, just for clarity, Mr. Frost, going back since we're talking about our existing manner of holding elections, has every district representative since this change was enacted run in an at-large race?
I believe so.
Having been through the process, I can tell you that you run in a district primary and then you run at large. So all district representatives have run in an and won at-large races, every single one of them. So there are lots of examples of Knoxville having a diverse council that has run on an at-large basis.
Any other questions on this section? If not, we'll pivot to the next part of the agenda, which is passage of the Public Charter 391 Act of 2023. And there are a number of items into this section, but I guess, Mr. Swanson, if you could give us an overview of the state law that was passed last year and its impact on our elections compared to what we do now.
Frankly, I thought Mr. Frost did an admirable job of that. Essentially, the bottom line is what happened was the state legislature adopted a statute that took away city council's option to do what they did, which was have district races run in the primary, but then those who advanced from the primary races then went to an at-large vote for the regular election, for the general election. And the state legislature said, we don't want that anymore. We want district-only races. And so that's the Public Chapter 391 accomplished that. It said, if you're going to have district council members, those district council members must be elected both primary and in the general election in the district only. So that's really the impact of Chapter 399.
Councilwoman Fugit.
Thank you. I have a question. Did the public chapter address being able to win at the primary level if someone got more than 50%, since it would just be district and then district again?
No, it did not
Okay.
address that. It's
Okay. So you would,
technically what it did was take away the exemption that allowed us an exception. We had an exception, and a few other municipalities had an exception that allowed us to do it the way that we did it. And what they really did in the statute was remove that exception.
okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
I may just ask a question there. Because it was an exception that we operated under, because that exception has been removed, we are essentially left with options. We aren't dictated specifically for one type of approach because there are multiple cities in the state that have different approaches. Is that the right way to think about this?
Well, the change in the state law took away our exception, and it said, going forward, you're going to do this new system, but you can also take into account other processes to do your elections, and that's what we're discussing now.
Right. So as long as we're in compliance with the state law, there are options for us to pursue.
The statute only addresses district-only
Okay.
representation.
Thank you. Councilman Roberto.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Just piggybacking on what you just said. So the election process that Knoxville's been used to for 55 years changed, but not through action of council. That changed because of the state law. And
True.
okay. And what we're discussing is what types of ways the people of Knoxville, the voters of Knoxville, can make a choice on what they might want to do for, what those elections might look like going forward. Because what we're trying to do is get into compliance with state law, which right now we're a violation of.
Are you asking the question?
Yes, trying to. Maybe it's not a very artfully crafted one.
I would assume that is your intent, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions about the state law that passed in 2023? I assume not. This council is very familiar because we had a workshop dedicated to that and had multiple rounds of public input at council meetings and all the community meetings that we're in. So we're very familiar with it, but I wanted to make sure that the public was aware of the ramifications of that state law. Any other questions? If not, we'll move on to the next stage of our agenda, which is the Home Rule Charter Amendment referendum. And so if we were to propose changes to our voting, someone alluded to this earlier, but we've asked Chris Davis, the Knox County Election Commission Administrator, to join us. Thank you, Mr. Davis, for coming.
Glad to be here.
If we made any change to the way we vote and put it on the ballot, can you walk us through what the process would be, what the cost would be? What should we expect in terms of a timeline? Let the voters and, the residents and potential voters on this matter understand what's ahead if that were to be approved.
Certainly. Thank you for your time today. Appreciate being invited. I will tell you that Tennessee Code Annotated Title II, Chapter 3, Part 204 talks about it's a general law which frequently controls the timing of an election, of a question or a referendum, and provides for the following. If a county resolution or municipal ordinance directs the County Election Commission to hold a referendum on the same day as the August general election, a regular November election such as one we have coming up, any regularly scheduled municipal election or presidential preference primary, then the resolution or ordinance shall be filed with the County Election Commission not less than 75 days prior to such an election. I'm going to assume that the reason that we're here today is to place a question. I'm just going to cut to the chase, that we're here to potentially place a question or questions on the November 5th, 2024 ballot. And if so, the question worded in proper form, and I believe the way it is, the question should be outlined, I believe is touched on briefly in Title II, Chapter 5, Part 208 of Tennessee Code, referring to how you would craft the question in a yes/no fashion. I'm sure you're familiar with that, I believe the last time we had the city council put questions on the ballot, or the city put questions on the ballot, was in November of 2016. I believe that was. That's 8 years ago. So that would govern that. But nonetheless, the question in proper form, and my assumption is it would have to be approved by 2 readings, I guess, of council. I'm getting into y'all's business a little bit now. But it would have to be to our office and completed no later than Thursday, August the 22nd, which is, it's about, 5 weeks from now, something like that, give or take. At that point, then also, if in reading Article 11, Section 9 of the Tennessee Constitution, the legislative body of the municipality would have to publish the proposal so made and submit the same to its qualified voters at least 60 days after the publication. So meaning basically you being the city, would have to publish the question. It doesn't say in a newspaper general circulation. I'm going to let you, craft your opinion on that.
We're probably going to do it in a newspaper of general circulation anyway.
I assumed you would, but shouldn't be assuming things. Nonetheless, it would have to be published no later than 60 days prior to the election. And of course, we being the Election Commission, would have to follow all applicable guidelines with regard to our normal notices, meaning that we would have to publish it sometime between 20 and 30 days prior to the election, which we would do with our early voting ad, which would be published on or about, on or about October the 11th. And then we would also publish that again, not that we're required to do so under charter or anything, but just under general state law, on October the 31st, Halloween. This question would be put to the voters both in early voting, nursing homes, absentee voting, as well as property qualified voting, which is something we don't normally have to worry about during a November presidential election. And so I can't even begin to tell you, and I've had a couple of sleepless nights over the whole prospect of putting questions on a November presidential ballot, because it convolutes my ballot 7 ways from Sunday. But nonetheless, if that's what we're directed to do, we will proceed forth. And there's a whole laundry list of challenges that I'd be glad to opine on, but I'm also glad to be quiet if you want me to. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. Are there questions for Mr. Davis? Councilwoman Roberto.
Oh, thank you, Vice Mayor. Election Administrator Davis, I don't think I've been in a public meeting with you since my time on the Election Commission, but great to have you here.
Thank you.
Can you talk to us a little bit about, the challenges or the ease at which you can administer a at-large election versus a district race? Are there challenges that you have to deal with that? Specifically, I'm thinking about the 5th District and the other at-large races going on at the same time.
Certainly.
But if you could expand on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, certainly. I assume you're referring to the challenges maybe we faced last year, for instance, when we had the 5th District, and then we had, I guess, the 3 at-larges, as well as the mayor and the municipal judge. Certainly, it is a little bit of a logistical problem for us, just because we have to make sure that the 5th District precincts, get the specific ballot, but the other precincts in the city 1, 2, 3, 4, districts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 get a separate ballot from District 5. So essentially, we're not letting any District 5 voters pollute that ballot, or more importantly, vice versa in that case. So there's a little bit of, some different ballots we have to print for different precincts. There are a couple of city council precincts, there are a couple of election commission precincts that have voters both with the 5th District and with another district. I'm thinking specifically of Precinct 19 is Thrive Lonsdale, I believe it is. There's where you've got District 3 and District 5. Well, obviously, we don't want to let a District 3 voter vote in a District 5 race, as an example. I will tell you from a practical perspective, and I'm just going to editorialize here a little bit, the idea of moving the 5th district into the same cycle as the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 is very appealing to me. I will tell you, it is, I'm not going to get into I'm not going to editorialize much beyond that, but I think it would make it much easier to administer said election.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Parker.
In terms of cost, when I brought a amendment forward a couple of years ago, I was told at the time that each question would cost us $40,000. Is that an accurate estimate of what that cost should be this year?
I will tell you, looking at a number of different costs, and I won't go into them in detail unless you want me to go into them in as much detail as I can. It's hard to estimate, but I would estimate on the low end, let's sake of argument, I don't know that the number of questions necessarily matters so much as the length of how long the questions are. And I'm looking at what I assume are the individuals who might write the questions or at least have some good input into that. But it's going to depend, it's going to lengthen the ballot essentially, meaning we could go from 8.5 by 11 ballot to an 8.5 by 14 ballot. I know that seems like a little thing, but when you're in the polling place and you're printing that ballot out, every little bit of time makes sense, is important. If you're going from, this upcoming ballot as an example, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds and bore anybody, but to give you an example, this upcoming November ballot at the moment will have your race for president. It'll have your race for United States Senate, United States House. Everybody will get a state House seat. And then about 40% of the county will get a state Senate seat. So right now, at the immediate moment, we're looking at 4 to 5 races on a ballot. What that means for us is it's a very short ballot. It's an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. We have been voting since August of 2020 on paper. The last time we had the questions was in 2016 when we didn't have paper. We had the old rotary, machines, which made it much easier to administer. But nonetheless, it could take adding even one question, let alone potentially 3 or even 4, because my understanding, we're not doing this in a vacuum, is that the county may be looking at adding a question as well. It could increase it from an 8.5 and 11 by 11 to 8.5 by 14. It could increase it potentially from 1 page to 2 pages. And with the fact that I'm planning on well over 200,000 voters coming into our polling place, if I have to go from 1 page to 2 pages, primarily because of questions, there's going to be a significant cost. And I would say it could be, I'm low ending it here, could be 30,000. It could be upwards of 70 or 80,000. And I've just been doing, I apologize, I've been doing some back of the napkin math this week because I'm conducting an election right now. But there are going to be, not only the cost for ink and the cost for paper, but potentially the costs for extra workers. And one of the reasons I say that is, and most of you probably know this, but many of your voters do not, is there are a number of precincts that we call county precincts, if you will. And you can think of those as Powell, Halls, Farragut, South Doyle, those types of places, where there are city voters that exist. And so normally it'd be very simple to just take them a general election ballot for election day. If you live in Farragut, or if you live in South Knox County down in the New Hopewell area, or if you live up in you live up in the Powell area or maybe in the Halls area or somewhere. Well, now I'm going to have to, there's about 5,800 voters that are city voters that are not in city precincts. You may know well those as city annexed voters, or I would call them finger annexed voters. For instance, some of the ones that jump out at me are over in North Shore Town Center down in the southwest portion of the county. They're, I'm not good, but 8-9 miles from downtown, but yet they are in the city. So we'd have to provide them with the city ballot. What that does is when you go into the polling place on election day at, say, let's say for argument, say 69 North, which is a precinct out in southwest Knox County, normally on election day, while it'll be extremely busy, I'm giving them 1 ballot, period. Now, with this contributing to it, I'd have to give them 2 ballots. And so that's going to be increased cost that I normally wouldn't have to adopt. Number 2, something I didn't even think about until yesterday, I'm glad somebody brought that up for me, was property qualified voters. And we have literally, I don't know who's been talking to who here, but we've had probably 15 to 20 calls. We won't get 15 to 20 calls during a city election asking about property qualified voters. We've had them now in the last week, people calling about property qualified and wanting to vote and getting registered as property qualified. And I can't really imagine they're worried about, no offense to y'all, city council's elections next August. I'm assuming that they're getting fired up because of something that may or may not be on the ballot today. So there will be increased costs for that. And granted, that's only about 300 people, but we do have to take the time to process all of the applications for ballot, turn around and make sure they get the proper ballot, and then make sure that it gets out to them, because they're going to be able to vote in their county precincts for those that live in Knox County, but then they're also going to have to be mailed the questions if they live in basically property qualified voters who live somewhere in the state of Tennessee. They may be voting, they could be in Blount County and get their Blount County ballot, but then we're going to have to mail them the ballot for that. Those really are and then there's going to be additional staff costs, because if I have to put once again, I feel like I'm getting too far into the weeds here, but please tell me.
This is helpful. Keep going.
Okay. I will tell you that we have two methods of administering elections on Election Day in our 78 polling places. In some precincts, I'll use precinct 17, for instance, Christenberry. Generally speaking, we are using pre-printed ballots on Election Day. You go in, you present yourself to vote, you get your ballot, you vote it, you go on. In some precincts, I could think of Larry Cox is a good one, North Knox County. Larry Cox, anybody who votes at Larry Cox, there are two precincts there. I need to ensure that the voters get the proper ballot. So I have to have what's called a ballot on demand. Just literally, if you go right next door, you can see the ballot on demand where we print your ballot off when you vote. We have to have those. Right now, at the immediate moment, I'm planning on deploying about 23 of those for Election Day based on just a variety of different reasons. If we have to go to something where we put city questions on the ballot, that's probably going to increase somewhere around 30 to 38, going from 23 to 38. So that's an additional 15 locations that will have a ballot on demand, which means we need a couple of additional workers to make sure that we're pushing the right buttons. So there's some increased cost there as well. So unfortunately, Counselor, I'm not sure I can give you an exact amount, but I'm spitballing here and saying it's not going to be insignificant. It's going to be low end 30, maybe high end 70 to 75, something like that. Yep.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question, but I don't know if others have questions.
We'll let Councilmember Thomas go, and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, thank you for appearing today. Just in regard to the 5th District and aligning it with the other districts, is there a long-term cost difference that you can predict at this moment about whether or not it would be cheaper for the Election Commission to make this change, or would it be negligible? Or?
I think this is maybe an indictment, I don't know, but I think given the relatively low turnout of city elections currently, I think the cost would be negligible. I think there would be, it'd be a little bit, certainly, but one way or the other, but I don't know that anything jumps out at me with regard to, I think from a process perspective, it makes it easier.
Okay.
Councilwoman Parker, back to you.
Thank you. I don't know if there's anyone here who can speak to the budget, but the budget was also something I looked to see if we were going to have a charter amendment process, and I believe I remember $200,000 for election commission. Can anyone speak to whether we have budgeted for these charter amendments?
No, I can't really speak specifically to what's in the budget with regard to that. I know there are sufficient funds available. If council elects to have a charter amendment on the ballot, there are funds available for that, and they can be appropriated for that purpose.
Wonderful. Okay, so next question. For the law department, if the regional at-large positions move forward, would there not be a need to amend other parts of the charter? For instance, Section 404, that sets up our districts in order to redefine our government composition, essentially, to redefine our city council as not being comprised of district representatives, but comprised of regional representatives.
I looked at that and I conferred with Stephanie O'Hara at MTAS. Districts are established by ordinance, which is, all of council knows, is much easier to change and that would not have to be placed on the ballot with a charter amendment. And every 10 years, as everybody knows, there's a census process to go through. And within 120 days, your districts, 120 days from the publication of the census, your districts must be established. So this is a process you go through once every 10 years. So the proposal by Councilmember Roberto, I think it would be an easy to adopt, assuming the council passes it, puts it on the ballot, and the voters pass it, because it's changing nomenclature. You're not, for example, moving Ward 11 from District 4 to District 3. You're changing District 1 would be south. District 4 would become north, and so on and so forth to correspond with the geographical directions.
And so if we were to propose that we went to an all-district election system, would those sections need to be amended then?
Yes, because we currently have 6 districts, and if you went
And
to a
3 more.
9-district system, you're taking the same piece of pie and the same pie, but you're making smaller slices. So you would have to get into probably a similar process that, for example, now retired Rick Emmett was involved in, where you would have to, and MTAS was involved in, you would have to look at the creation of new districts that would have the same population within a certain plus or minus percentage point, that, you go through the process we go through every 10 years. You'd have to do that again if you went from a 6-district system to a 9-district system.
And those 9 districts would need to be defined in the charter.
No, I think they would need to be defined in an ordinance, like the current 6 districts are.
But we would at least need to name that we are creating 9 districts and no at-large positions in that section. And then by ordinance, we can define the
I
9
believe so.
districts.
The way Councilmember Roberto's proposal, somewhere in there, I don't remember off the top of my head, there was anticipatory language in there that if this passed the voters, that within, maybe it was 90 days or 120 days, council would enact an ordinance that would basically rename the districts. Getting to the geographical, like the east, the 6th district would become the east, the 1st district would become the south. There wouldn't be a change, wards would not be moved around between different districts.
So the folks who live currently off of Sutherland Avenue in the 6th district would be east.
That would be the change of the name.
Okay. That's all I got.
Councilman Roberto.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Just for clarity, because you got them swapped a second ago, the 1st district would be south, the 2nd district would be west, the 3rd district would be northwest, the 4th district would be northeast, the 5th district would be north, and the 6th district would be east. And the reason for those designations is that I think my district colleagues will probably recognize this. When you're talking to city voters about your district, when you say, I'm from District 2, they say, I don't know what you're talking about. And we have to name it something. And so I think that the best way I could come up with was to make them, directional names. And maybe there's a better way to do it than that, but that's what I came up with. Thank you.
There are 3 proposals before us that we will talk about in just a second. So as long as we can postpone that just for a minute. Are there any other questions around existing manner of elections, the state law that was passed, or any process, cost, or timeline changes associated with a referendum? Councilwoman Parker.
No, I'm waiting for the next section.
Okay. All right. Well,
Vice Mayor,
sorry, Councilwoman McKenzie.
thank you. So my apologies if I missed it. So we talked, you kind of outlined the 6 districts. So the additional 3 at large, what territory would be their responsibility as far as, or would they wouldn't have they would just cover all of the districts. So
We're-
that
we're gonna
would
get-
not change.
We're going to get to that.
I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah, it's okay. I like where your head's at. All right, on to that section, though. I think in order of the agenda, we will, I thought that there are 3 proposals before us. So I think we go in the order of the agenda and let the, whoever proposed those talk us through their perspective on the matter, and then we'll discuss each of the items at that time. So first, I have a proposal that was originally submitted by Councilmember Thomas. It's item D1 on our, D1 on our agenda. Councilman Thomas, is there anything you want to give an overview about this or your perspective on the matter before we discuss it as a body?
I'll be brief because I think my fellow council members have been aware of the situation in the 5th District for quite a while. And basically, the proposal is to bring the 5th District into sync with the other district races. There's been unfortunate circumstances even before the legislature acted, where in the 5th District, people in the 5th District actually only had the opportunity to run for city council every 4 years. In the other districts, you had an option of running in your district, and then in 2 years later, you could run at large. But because the 5th District was in all the other at-large seats, we were at a disadvantage to run for office because that opportunity came around every 4 years. So it was a disadvantage enough the way it was. The action of the legislature makes it just basically totally unfair, because not only would that situation remain, but the voters in the 5th District would only have an opportunity to vote every 4 years, as opposed to the city elections coming around in every 2. So I think that's almost obvious that it's unjust. So the proposal is simply to put the 5th District in the same cycle as the other district races, and then you wouldn't have a question about fairness or unfairness. And I will add only one thing. There's been kind of, over the years, I've observed probably less political activity in the 5th District than in the other districts. And my thinking is that this has probably contributed to that a bit, the situation. And with the new situation with the passage of the legislature, it's just completely unfair.
And to get on that cycle, there's a bridge period of 2 years. Can you explain that? Just, we've all read the packet and are familiar with these dynamics, but the public may not be as aware.
Yeah, in the next election, which would be for the 5th District, which would be in 2027, in order to get things into sync, that, as proposed, that term would only be 2 years. And then in 2029, there would be another election, and that would get us completely in sync with all the other elections. Now, there was an option, and we talked about this, and I gave it a lot of thought. The other way is to make that election in 2027 be 6 years. There's arguments on both sides, but my thinking is if we had that election 6 years, it would be 2033 before everything fell into sync. And I'm also thinking a 2-year election gives the people in the 5th District an opportunity to get more engaged, more candidates come out. So I feel quite comfortable that the best option is to make that election 2 years to get everything into sync.
Thank you for that. Are there questions on this proposal or discussion? Councilwoman Fugit.
Councilman Thomas, we've had side conversations because we're running at the same time about that. This is an assumption on my part, as I assume that it was, the 5th District was put that way, so it would be 5 council members being elected one time and 4 being elected the next time, and this would go to 6 and 3. Either way, there is a majority that comes on every 2 years. The majority would go from 5 to 6. Any thoughts about that or concerns about that?
Couple, I thought that originally, I thought that was the reason. I'm not sure it is. We'll Mr. Johnson, do you have your knowledge of history, know a little bit about it?
We did look into that issue a while ago. As best we can tell, there was an elected official, a council member who was elected in 68 or around that time period that this change went into effect. And as best we can tell, a favor was done so that she would not have to run immediately again in an election. And they allowed her to serve a full 4-year term before she had to run again.
Okay. I mean, I could just see that would be things that citizens would ask. It's like, it was 5-4, now it's going to go to 6-3. Is that going to too heavily sway things? Was there a deliberative thought process about why to do 5-4, and it was more to keep someone's first term not so short?
That's at least what was reported in the
Okay.
newspaper at the time.
Okay, well, that's all the record we have then. Okay, thanks.
Councilwoman McKenzie.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And so I actually had that same question as well, because that actually leaves you with only 3 sitting council members with what we would consider institutional knowledge, and 6 that would be coming on brand new when they're first. If everyone is going, if all the seats are going to now be aligned, there would be new council members coming on and possibly reelected. Maybe not all, but some may. And so that was one of my questions and somewhat of a concern as well. So just an observation.
Yeah, I understand that concern completely. One thing, though, is that new members have been coming on in mass because incumbents have almost always won. And eventually, that is going to get out of sync. Like, people might drop off early, they may not run again. So you actually have veterans that will be coming on at the same time as the newbies. So like in a 6-year cycle, it won't necessarily be newbies as things kind of get a little bit out of the incumbent arena, let's say.
If I may, you're suggesting that just because there's 6 at a time doesn't mean they're all going to be 6 new ones? Right.
Have virtually always won,
Yeah.
but that, eventually, that's not going to be the case.
Right.
So there will be incumbents and then new people coming on. And then the other thing I would add to that too is with the 3 at-large people, you have the mayor and you have the city judge. So you have 5 significant seats in that cycle.
All
And
at
then-
large. in
All at
sense.
large, and then 6 the next time. So in a way, there's more of a balance there too.
Okay.
There's different ways of looking at this, I understand, but that's the kind of the way it looks to me.
Councilwoman Parker.
Thanks. I support this proposal, and I had a friendly amendment that I sent in to Rob on Friday at 3, but not able to process it in time, so I don't even know if it made it to you. But when I read it, to me it read, "The terms of the office of the 6 geographically distributed council members shall expire on the 20th day of December 2025. And when I read that, I read point blank, period. Charlie Thomas is leaving city council. What is happening? And so I reached back out, but we weren't able to have that conversation in time. And so I think it should be written a little differently to be clearer.
You're exactly right. And we looked at that, and I've had a conversation with Mr. Frost and Mr. Swanson, and at the meeting on Tuesday, we will tweak that language because
Awesome.
it's not clear. We all believe that in substance, it probably wouldn't make a difference because of the addition in the language that says "or" until another candidate is authorized to serve. So in substance, it probably was okay to begin with, but you're exactly right about it being equivocal, and we already have language drafted, thanks to Mr. Swanson, and I'll present that on Tuesday. But good eye, thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, as competitive as your most recent race was, we wouldn't want you to have to go to battle again so soon. All right. Are there any other questions for item D1 of our proposal submitted by Councilmember Thomas? Okay. All those, I'm just kidding. On to the next item, D2. This item was submitted by Councilmember Roberto. So I guess to get us started in discussion for this item, Councilmember Roberto, would you give us an overview of why you submitted this proposal and any kind of preliminary points you want to make?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And I'm going to incorporate my answer to Councilmember McKenzie's question as I go through this. Simply put, what this proposal does, the regional at-large amendment that we're talking about, this proposal, it simply brings Knoxville's charter into compliance with state law by adopting a process that's already used and in compliance with state law in 16 other cities in Tennessee. It does so in a way that is the least change from what the voters in Knoxville are used to, because all of our district races run at-large races too. And so simply put, that's what we're doing. Now, to answer the specific question from Councilmember McKenzie, all of the at-large races, A, B, and C, there's no change to those at all, except that there is language in there that if you get more than 50% of the vote, then you can win in the primary and you don't have to go to the regional. That same language is in the regional district representatives as well. And so just like Mr. Frost and Director Swanson had said, we have a framework and an ordinance that already defines the boundaries of the districts. We don't have to make any change to those boundaries. But what you know how when you and I would run, we had a residency requirement or a residency qualification to run for the 2nd and the 6th district. That's basically what will remain, is that you'll have to live within the boundaries of what used to be the 6th district. I'll have to live within those as well. And that's the way the 16 other cities deal with it. It's a qualification. So that's also easier for our administrator of elections to administer as well, because instead of checking who lives in what district when they're voting, like he was talking about, all they have to do is check you and me and make sure we're in the right place. Does that answer your question?
It does. And so as of today, with the way that these boundaries would be set, what changes would be made to the 6th district, or do we know, we have that information at this time?
I wouldn't recommend making any changes to any of the boundaries for the regional at large. We just went through that process. We have to do that. The reason it's in an ordinance, right, is because you have to make changes to it every 10 years, and you're going to have to make changes to it. If it was in the charter, it would be much harder to make those changes, right? So it would be an ordinance. I would not support making any changes at all to the footprints. In 10 years, we'll get another, or not quite 10 years, but when we get another census, a different council will have to review those and make changes to it. But that's the appropriate time to look at those footprints. It's not now. This is designed to be the simplest possible, least jarring, most similar to what voters are used to, that brings us into compliance with state law.
Are there any questions for Councilmember Roberto or discussion of this item? Councilwoman Fugit.
Thank you. So, you know, Councilwoman Parker mentioned it, and it's a question out there about, will this voting, I mean, we can have pros and cons no matter how we vote. I mean, some people like it, some people don't. Is there a concern, clearly you don't have one or you wouldn't have brought it, I assume, but that this could overwhelm the district by everybody running citywide?
Can you say what?
So,
Say what you mean by
so the
overwhelm.
point is, you know, I'm at large, so I'm not as worried about this because I've run at large. I had to, everybody all over the city had to like me or at least not hate me and, you know, get elected. But we have had instances, the way it's set up now, where whoever finished first in the district didn't win citywide. And so that rarely happens, but there were people who had an indication of what the district preferred as their representative. I'm sure you've thought about this. I would like to hear some concern, I think that's going to be something we're going to have to discuss, and we'll have to talk about if the charter amendment, if it goes forward and is on the ballot, those questions will be questions that citizens will ask. Because we used to vote at large, and then districts were created in the 60s, I assume, as part of some civil rights movement and some concern about making sure that there was not only people from certain parts of the community who could elect everybody. If you have larger turnout in certain districts, you could have a disparate impact. I understand what you're trying to do, and I really like, having served on a body where people only worried about their district, I really love the fact that everybody who runs for city council has to meet every district in the city and learn about every district in the city so that you are thinking and have a familiarity with your entire city, not just the district you represent. So if it sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, I'm speaking to the pros and cons, and I just think we have to be prepared to explain this and be comfortable talking about it if this goes forward and is put on the ballot. I'm sure you have an answer.
I think that's a great series of questions, which I'll try to address all of them. And I think your experience on a district-only body is very helpful, and I would love to hear from you about how that impacts accountability and other issues that you've seen with that. So I'll turn it around and ask you a question as well. But
Lawyers are good at that. Lawyers are good at that.
basically, if you think about with what's happened already, we have seen a change that has already occurred to our election process. So it's up to us to talk about what system might be a good system for us that gets us into compliance with state law. So the connection, I think the simplest way to explain it to somebody would be to say, the last time you went in to vote for city council, you got to vote for 9 city council members. Doesn't matter where you lived. It didn't matter what district you lived in. You got to vote for 9 council members. Not all at once, because they were in 2 separate cycles, right? If we do nothing, then you're going to vote for 4. So you're only going to have a connection to 4 of your representatives. And I do think there are benefits to having accountability for all council members. And so I think that's, if you're asking like, how do you put it on a bumper sticker, I think it's probably the best way I could come up with. There may be a better way, and I'm happy to talk about it. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the million-dollar question is why are we even having this discussion? And the discussion is because you used to get to vote for everybody that sat on city council, and as of the passage of the new law, you won't. And all changes to elections have unintended consequences. And so I understand when you're going this. To answer your question about pros and cons, I mean, I did see that County Commission was looking about adding at-large representatives to the Board of Education, and I used to think we should have them because sometimes when you are only representing your district, that's all you think about. And the pie is very much looked at, what do I get from my district, not always what's best for the city or the county. So there are pros and cons to both, but I just wanted to have that out there about why you thought this was important. What were we losing with the state law change?
and I think just to really put a fine point on it, the purpose of the proposal is to bring us into compliance with state law.
Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you. What is before us tonight is actually new language. So I have not read this proposal yet. And I just pulled up the agenda to see if I could find it, but I haven't been able to scroll down to it. Yeah, I should have went a different way. But I do see that there are amendments proposed to sections 401 and 402, other sections beyond just the one section amendment that we were provided as council. So I'll have to read that and come with questions on Tuesday about those changes. But what I wanted to bring into the conversation is the research that I found from MTAS, and invite others to share what their understanding is in terms of at-large voting systems. And if you can Google MTAS at-large voting, and you'll get to the article that I'm looking into. And they go through the various Supreme Court decisions to identify what would be a valid claim that someone might bring to challenge an electoral system arguing discrimination. And it is something that is not super easy to prove. However, the article from MTAS says, one ironclad rule can be observed in the at-large electoral system cases. If under the old election system, no blacks or few were ever elected to office, that system will not stand constitutional muster. The corollary is that if under a proposed election system, it is likely that no blacks or few blacks will be elected to office, the system will not stand constitutional muster. Beyond that simple rule, a municipality must also defend against 9 objective factors the courts have used to analyze the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act claim. Among that, you have to look at the extent to which members of the minority group in the state or the political subdivision bear the effects of discrimination in such areas as education, employment, and health, which hinder their ability to participate effectively in the political process. I think that we've had many a discussion about the disparities that we continue to face in this city when it comes to racial minorities. You also have to look at the extent to which voting in elections of the state or political subdivision is racially polarized, the extent to which minority representation has been elected in a jurisdiction. Again, when we look at large races in the history of the city of Knoxville, we've been able to elect one, and so I don't understand how anyone can feel certain that this newly adopted system that's being proposed would not help hurt our minority participation. As has been lifted up, the regional proposal may have residency requirements, but we have no way of knowing what the preferences of those district residents are. And if we look at just recent history and all of the effort that many leaders in this city put into supporting Councilmember Gwen McKenzie's election, who came very close to losing an election against Jennifer Montgomery, who had a well-known name, realtor, and I could imagine could have won an at-large race in the primary election. Having that background as a realtor, having the name recognition, that was absolutely possible because we usually do not see candidates in the 6th district who got votes as close to the person who went on to win, who wasn't from the African American community. So that was surprising to see someone get so many votes. And it took leaders throughout the city to come out and say, we've got to protect this 6th district seat. We need minority representation on city council. So I just, when I imagine this proposal moving forward, I worry about the impact that it would have. I don't know whether this would, a challenge to the system would be successful in court. But I think it would definitely make us more, make it more possible that we might be challenged, considering our history and considering what the courts have said about at-large voting systems.
Thank you. Councilwoman McKenzie.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And so I don't disagree that there was concern, and I think that to some degree, and I've been hearing that there's still some concern. Yes, the race that I won over Jennifer Montgomery was, I think, less than 2,000 votes citywide. But my biggest concern, in a sense, is especially with the political climate that we see nationally, that has really unfolded a lot here in the last couple of weeks, is removing the right of the districts to signal to the city and present to them 2 candidates that they would prefer to see leading their district. And so, so I'm kind of struggling with that a little bit, and just wanted to put that out there. Because what could happen with a citywide on both races potentially is the city pulling out 2 candidates that may not be the popular choice for the people who live in that district. And that's a potential and a reality that I think that we have to consider. Even though we are partisan, we know how that goes in our elections. And so that's one thing that has really kind of bubbled up to the top here in the last 2 weeks. And I just wanted to share that open and honestly with my colleagues as we move forward.
Councilmember Fugit.
I will also say to that point, I mean, I only won my at-large race by 80 votes with an African-American man who very easily could have beaten me. So I don't disagree with everything that's said. And as for partisanship, I mean, as we are a community that is becoming much more partisan and a partisan divide between city limits and county limits, there could also be a change in diversity of thought in terms of who gets elected and have more one-party rule. So all I'm saying is no system is perfect. But I hear all these things. I think the reality is we wouldn't be having this conversation if a member of the state legislature did not bring this forward to change our elections because they wanted to eliminate citywide voting at all for district representatives. So I agree with you, Councilwoman McKenzie. I like the way we were doing it a whole lot better than any choice we've got at this point. And so I agree with you. It is a struggle. I liked districts telling us the top two they wanted and then everybody voting citywide because I thought it was the best of both worlds. But that option has been taken from us. And so now we have to decide, do we leave it as it is, where it's just district races for 6 races and 3 at large? Or do we let citizens tell us if they still want a say in everybody that serves on city council? And it's a struggle. I mean, it's a lot to think about.
I'll take a turn just if it's okay. I can't have one? Okay, fine. All right, let's revoke my light. You know, I think these are real risks and concerns to bring up, and so I've thought about this for a long time, and so I've kind of moved into a bit of clarity on how I feel about the matter, and I think that this proposal is sound for a number of reasons. One is, I do think it does the least amount, I think you mentioned least jarring, or it's the least change from what our city voters vote on now. We district seat holders are both district representative and we run at large now. So we are, if you want any evidence of history, to the extent we can compare anything, we are a representation of what this proposes and most closely. So I think our existing diverse city council is a product of this approach more than it is other bodies in our community. So if you look at county commission or school board that are only district only, those are least diverse bodies. And I would say some of those members have confidently told me that, you know, there is a very big downside to only answering to your district members, constituents. And I can speak from experience, and this is very hard to articulate, so I'll do my best for voters now and in the future, but it means a lot when you are voting on another district item and you are trying to do the right thing, but you are practically accountable to those other district voters, and that is real. And so when you vote on a matter up here and you are accountable to everybody in the city, there's no off days and there's no not paying as much attention. And so I'm not suggesting that our other bodies of government operate that way. I do know that I have had a lot of feedback where we are accessible to other districts because we are accountable. And I think the concern about districts signaling their top 2 preferences to the broader community is real, but I think a primary would do that very clearly as well, as our primaries already do. We already all know who wins the district because it's clear now, but we would have that evidence as well going forward by the results and the precincts that Mr. Davis outlined. So I guess the clarity I have is that when I have to choose between being accountable to every person in the community versus only people that live in the first district, and by the way, you know, UT students are part of my district too, and South doesn't necessarily characterize them as well. There's no words that can any more than the first district does represent everybody, although we can say we're number 1. So that's how I've been training voters. Yeah, so I just want to kind of offer, I've had a long time to think about this, and the words on the page that were submitted here, you know, were drafted by Councilmember Roberto, but they are in line with the great trade-off that I think is before us, and I think this is a better approach than what the default is. And so I think there are other cities in the state to look at, but we are already all at-large representatives in one way. Practically speaking, determining that in the primary versus waiting until the general, I think is negligible. So Councilwoman Helsley.
So I guess to kind of put a pin in it, I totally understand what Gwen's saying and what you're saying. So we have to weigh, okay, but for whatever it's worth, Councilwoman McKenzie, I knew who you were, and I never knew who Jennifer Montgomery was, just so you know. And I live in District 1, so there you go. But anyway, so we do want to protect that district, but at the same time, I love the fact that we're so cohesive and in general, work really well together. I don't see that on other bodies that are district-centric because they really don't care. I mean, if you ever watch a county commission meeting, I mean, it's pretty evident. So it seems like it's a decision to make, but that's kind of it. So wherever we land, we land. But I do like the way we're able to work together, though. And Lynn even talks to me. It's all great.
Councilmember Thomas.
Yes, I want to say a few words about diversity, and I say that as someone who represents the 5th District, which along with Councilperson McKenzie's district, I would say has the most diverse and demographically all different than probably in the old city. And it's, we got African Americans, we got whites, we got Hispanics, I got people of all income levels. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really proud that I represent the 5th District. So this concern about diversity and demographics is something that actually I've been involved for, I guess, in this struggle pretty much a long time. I don't know how these dynamics are really going to play out. What I do know is that the system we've had in place has brought us the most diverse city council that we've ever had. And the proposal that's on the table is closer to that than anything else that we might imagine. So, and we're much more diverse than the Tennessee legislature that made these proposals to change our election. So, again, I don't know how these dynamics will play out, but I think I feel comfortable that as far as protecting diversity, the system we've had and the proposal that's more like the system that we have now would probably ensure that diversity more than any others. If it doesn't, I would hope that the electorate and the body in the future after we're gone would repair it. But those are, the bottom line is what we've had gave us the most diverse council we've ever had. And this is more similar to that than anything else on the table, so.
Councilmember Roberto.
I would just say that maintaining a diverse council is, I think, absolutely critical to the success of our city. And just like my colleagues had said, the change has already happened. This is an opportunity to bring us into compliance with state law and provide an option for the voters to make a decision. And I think what we've outlined is a lot of, some of the discussion that will be had by the voters. But I think I think we all talked about this at the time, but I like them telling us what that looks like, not the other way around. And just like Councilmember Thomas said, that system, which this as closely mirrors as you can and stay in compliance with state law, has produced the most diverse council that we've ever had in our city. And so if I thought that would be threatened by bringing something, then I wouldn't bring it. The history that we've seen over the very long time that we've had this at-large process has been such that we've had a diverse council. We've always had an African-American in the 6th District representing that seat since the time that we talked about this happening. As we talked about earlier, we've had to run in citywide races. There are examples of when there's been a white person and an African-American running in the 6th District, the African-American wins citywide. There are a lot of examples of people that have been on council who, you know, I think have tried to make sure that we have as diverse a council as we can. And I think we've made it to a point now where that's happened, and I think that's wonderful, and we need to make sure we preserve it. So I would not bring anything if I thought that would, I looked at history to give me some guide here.
Councilmember McKenzie.
Thank you. And it was not a dig or jab at anybody in any thought process, because at the end of the day, I do think it, you know, the voters should do.
Yeah. Somebody just pull the fire alarm.
It's the fire alarm. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and so, you know, at this juncture, I'm not opposed to giving the voters an option, you know, based on what has been imposed on us without consulting our body or the people of the city of Knoxville as to, you know, what they wanted to see, if they wanted a change. So I'm definitely not opposed. I'm just talking out loud and voicing concerns and opinions that I have heard to this point, because, you know, we have what we have at this time, unless the people in our city decide they'd like to go in a different direction, which gives them another option to consider. And so, you know, again, my thing is, and Debbie, I'm glad that you knew me citywide. But, you know, when I think about myself and running in that race, you know, I was fortunate enough to serve on a lot of boards across the city and be exposed to people across the city and in jobs and other things, and having friends across the city. You know, but I think about, you know, what if there's a dynamic person who is in the 6th district that hasn't served on a lot of boards, that doesn't have the mainstream outreach across the city, and they're just dependent on folks across the city that really doesn't know them. So what I would say to that, like all of us, the people coming after us, if the voters decide they want to do 2 at large, is that candidates are going to have to work really, really hard. Really, really hard. Because we all know, other than the at-large folks, that even running citywide, one cycle was a huge undertaking. So at-large, you know, council members, you know, my hat's off to you all, because that is absolutely a lot of work. It is a lot of work. And so again, when we think about this political climate, which we can't control because it's coming from a national perspective, I have a lot of concerns about what the future of the council here in the city of Knoxville could look like. And so I would just encourage us all, especially those of us who are going off council, because I hear from a lot of people that I don't know how you all do it. You know, it's so ugly and all these things. And yeah, there are some challenging days, but there are a lot of days where, you know, people get along. People want to look for common ground and common good and come together on a consensus for the betterment of our city. And so, you know, I think the voters do need to have that opportunity to make that decision. Thank you.
So just to put a fine point on this, and if this goes forward, if council approves this on 2 readings and it goes on the ballot, if it doesn't pass, what we get is district races for 6 and at-large for 3. So the voters really do have a choice. It's do you go with what state law now says we have to do, or do you try this? Am I correct? Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on item D2? Okay, we have one more item on our agenda. Item D3 was submitted by Councilwoman Parker. Councilwoman Parker, would you give us an overview of your perspective on this and why you submitted it and things we should consider?
Sure. I submitted this on Monday after having a chance to review the other proposals submitted. And when I first read Roberto's proposal, I did not understand that both elections would be at large to a citywide vote. And so I had to read that a couple of times. And once I realized that, I was very concerned about that going to an at-large vote. And I felt like it was not a small change to our charter, but a major change. And so I went into our charter and made actually minor changes to it. The section that is presented before you references section 707 of the charter, and the actual text that's in the charter that would be amended includes A, B, and C that outlines mayor, members of council by district, and members of council at large. And I included all three sections because last time I brought a charter amendment forward, I was presenting a solution to ties in elections and how we could resolve a tie in the primary. Because state law mandates that city council must resolve a tie in a municipal election, either by selecting the winner or by calling for a runoff. If a tie is to happen during the primary, there's not time for a runoff. And so there's just by changing the language from 2 candidates with the highest number of votes to the candidates with the 2 highest number of votes, we remove that possibility of a tie happening in the primary. And so that's why all 3 sections are in there, because that language was updated for all 3 sections. And of course, the judge follows the rules of a mayor's election, so it's for mayor, council, and judge. With the district-only voting, that's achieved in the members of the council by district section, and that was changed by changing 5 words, that the candidates receiving the 2 highest number of votes move on to the regular election, and then voters within each district vote in the November election rather than voters citywide would vote in that election. So that's the only change to that text. And then in the at-large section, I put the 50+1 rule, language for the 50+1 rule in the at-large section. So the ordinance serves 3 purposes: addressing the tie vote in the primary, addressing the 50+1 for at-large positions, and making district elections district-only. And in my opinion, what voters have been used to in this city is that you do not go up for a citywide vote if you can't make it out of your district. So that to some form, to some degree, district voters are determining who their representatives are. This new system would take that completely away from district voters and determining who their representatives are. I think that this is a smaller change and more in line with what folks have been used to in our elections of the district having a voice and determining who their representatives are. I think it also aligns with the Voting Rights Act and runs less of a risk of violating any parts of that act. We don't have to worry about whether people identify with a certain geographical region of the city to determine their voting. All of the other regionals proposals that have been proposed, I don't think line up with how people view where they live in the city necessarily. And so to me, this was a better option to present to the voters to address a new election system where voters were empowered to select their district representatives and still vote in the at-large races. There's more clarity between the roles of a district representative and an at-large representative. I would also support 9 district representatives, but I feel like we need more time to engage in a process like that. I've brought up the fact that we have lacked diversity on council until very recent elections. And we actually came together as a community and formed a movement of people to address the lack of diversity on city council. And we have been successful, and I imagine we have helped influence other elections. I imagine, one in particular is Lomax, who I was out knocking doors for, and that was a different strategy than what was pursued previously. People weren't running as teams on city council. That's how we get minorities elected. So I don't believe asking your minority community members to form a movement, should they want to get elected to council, means that we have accessible elections. I don't think that we can say that the structure that we have in place currently has led to the diversity that we have on council. The diversity we have on council is because people have worked hard to overcome the lack of diversity that we have on this council under our current system. So that's my introduction.
I have a question related to the tie aspect of this. Can you talk about the pros and cons of having one election where there's three names on the ballot versus 2, or talk a little bit about the trade-offs that you considered for that aspect of your proposal?
Yes, having been through a process and experienced a tie, it was my experience that voters felt very disenfranchised once they learned what our process was for a tiebreaker. And anytime you have a system like that in place, they're going to be very...
Which is, can you just remind folks that weren't, don't go into the whole story, but what is our process?
State law requires that city council determines the outcome of a tie or selects the winner to go on to the regular election. City council has the option to vote themselves, flip a coin, or they can call for a runoff. And at the time of my tie in 2017, there was a conversation about the possibility of a runoff, but we heard the timeline today of when that ballot needs to be prepared. Of course, that's for a referendum, but I imagine a similar timeline to determine what goes on that ballot, and there's just not enough time for a primary. And so I believe, based on my experience of how voters responded to how the tie was resolved in 2017, that the preference would be that candidates who tie would move on to the next ballot for the voters to be able to decide, rather than city council to decide which 2 people or which one person goes on the ballot with that one other person.
Thank you. Councilwoman McKenzie.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure that I have that clear. So would that be a special election with a runoff with those two candidates, or would they stay on the ballot would those two stay on the ballot with the third person?
The two people who have tied would stay on the ballot with the third person. Or the four people who have tied will stay on the ballot with the fifth person. However many people get those two highest number of votes. So if we get, multiple people who all get the same vote, they would all go on the ballot.
I have a brief question sorry, Councilwoman McKenzie, go ahead. Just our two attorneys, is there any conflict of state law with this approach?
I fear that there is. TCA Section 2-8-111, Sub 2 provides for how ties are resolved in case of municipal elections, and it provides for the city council or the municipal legislative body to make that decision. So that is a law of general application that generally preempts whatever the city comes up with on its own.
I meant to mention this a minute ago, but Mr. Davis, is there anything you would add to this item or the previous one in terms of how the elections are held or processes? No? Okay, thanks. Just wanted to make sure.
Well, let me
Back to you,
clarify. Because when I brought this issue forward 2 years ago, there was no conflict with state law. And we checked with the State Election Commission, and there was nothing within state law that prevented multiple candidates from going onto the ballot. So would this not be in alignment with state law because this is city council determining how we will deal with multiple candidates receiving the same vote in the primary election?
I could see you making that argument. I could see the opposite argument being made as well.
I mean, the other argument is that we're removing the possibility of a tie. By definition, the candidates with the top two votes are eligible to move on to the regular election by definition as we've defined it.
That argument might win the day, but as you announced it to us, you said there was a way you break a tie. And I think that maybe what the court decides it is as well.
Yeah, no. I would love an opinion from the State Election Commission on this. Thank you.
Councilmember Thomas.
Speaking totally hypothetically, I wondered what would happen if there was a tie in the next election, the election you proposed where all three would go on.
The city council then has the ability to either select the winner or call for a runoff.
Okay. So at some point, the city council might have to step in if there was infinite number of ties. We're talking hypothetically, of course.
Sure, yeah. I mean, if it's the regular general election, there's no ballot to move on to. So at that point, the city council has to make the decision.
Okay.
But when there's a ballot to move on to, then this would be able to apply.
Councilwoman McKenzie.
Thank you. So based on that point, Mr. Davis, if the decision falls with city council, if city council were to say, even if there was not an election that was scheduled, could city council say, we want a runoff and then set into motion a special election? Is that, just yes or no on that one?
No, not, no,
We
well,
don't have the authority to do
certainly
that?
not in a primary election, which we ran into this situation, as Councilwoman Parker mentioned, back in 2017. We have a number of statutory deadlines, we being the Election Commission, that we have to meet, everything from absentee ballots to, write-in deadline, to anything else that has to be done that would, given the current setup of city elections, meaning the last Tuesday in August for your primary and your first Tuesday following your first Monday in November, there's simply not enough time in a primary election to have a runoff.
Okay. So Mr. Frost or Mr. Swanson, based on the research or information that Councilwoman Parker presented, could you all do some research just to validate further what she stated, that when she had reached out, that, Councilmember Parker, would you repeat that you said that they told you that there was nothing prohibiting?
Yeah.
Sorry, if you could just turn your mic back on, sorry.
Yeah, that was an inquiry jointly made with Mr. Frost 2 years ago to the State Election Commission, and there were no issues with multiple candidates going onto the ballot. So there were no conflicts with this charter amendment when we shared it with the State Election Commission 2 years ago.
Councilmember Thomas.
Well, I'm just curious, again, speaking somewhat hypothetically, but if 3 people moved on to the general election, is there a requirement that the winner gets a majority? Or would the person be able to win with a plurality out of 3 candidates?
If it's a general election, state law would just say winner takes all, unless there's something in the city charter that contrary to that.
I'm not aware of anything in the charter that would be contrary to that.
Plurality would rule?
Well, I would imagine so. Yeah. However, I'm just going to opine, if I can, and take the floor for just a second. A lot of this might be solved, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, if people would get out and vote. And I know we have a camera here today. One of the things that frustrated me about the tie in 2017, 489 votes, I believe, for both Councilwoman Parker and Mr. Tyndall. We had over 15,000 people in that district that did not vote. And one of them could have decided this election. Just throwing that out there.
I don't think you'll get any argument from this body in that regard. Yeah, by the way, PSA, early voting has started for many races, so if you haven't voted, you'll be hearing from those campaigns until you do. Any other questions for Councilwoman Parker? If not, that's the end of our agenda. Are there any questions left unasked or discussions to close us off with? Councilwoman Parker.
Just one final point. Since being elected at large, we've had a couple of conversations that tend to come up about, what's the difference between my seat at large and the district seat? Because all district reps have to run at large anyway. And that has been an ongoing question. I think we need district reps and we need at-large reps. And I don't understand why we would want to have a purely at-large system. I don't. I believe districts deserve to have their own reps. And that's all I wanted to close with.
Thank you for that. Councilwoman Fugit?
Thank you. As a fellow at-large representative, I answer that question with the fact that the district rep lives in the district and is more in tune with the actual day in, day out activity within their district, and that as an at-large council person, I feel it's my responsibility to try to keep up with everything going on. And I think for citizens, whether we like this way of voting, somebody will represent a district. There will still be people that represent an area who will be expected to take most of the phone calls about streetlights, potholes, zoning issues, and that's the first point of contact for most people in a district is that person. I get less of those calls. Charlie gets the ones for his call, for his area. You get the ones in yours. And so I think that, to my way of thinking, is the biggest difference, that it is the person that the people who live in that area go to first.
Thank you for that. And if you ever want to know what it's like, I'll set up some call forwarding directly from my voicemail to yours. It's not pleasant, yes.
We just get called all around the city.
Fair enough. Okay, that's the end of our agenda. Before we adjourn, thank you for Mr. Swanson, Mr. Frost, and Mr. Davis. Thank you for your time, your commitment to our city, and this very important matter. And as of that, we are adjourned.